Okay, hello. I'm Brendan Lawton. I'm a colleague of a few of the organizers from last year's Point Sud conference, Struggles for Democracy in the Global South. And an important topic that the conference focused on was how social movements in Africa dealt and are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And in order to get different perspectives of this question, we wanted to ask activists from across the continent and then transform this into a small YouTube series for people to watch later on. And today we are talking with Quraysha Sooliman and about her activism and movements in the past two and a half years during the pandemic. She is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Mediation in Africa. And thank you very much for being with me today.
Hi, how are you? And thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course, yeah, we're very excited to have you here. I guess just to start, could you tell us what movements you've been involved in the past 2.5 years during the pandemic, and what maybe one in particular, and what the struggle is fighting for?
So the last 2 years have, well, actually during the pandemic, or from the start of the pandemic, have been particularly difficult. I'm sure it's, a feeling or a mutual feeling with people all over the world. The important thing to realize is that I didn't stick to one particular organization, one particular movement, one particular group, or we actually, it was a blessing in a way. Many of us rotated between different movements, and this is because there are so many issues that needed to be attended to, and usually there aren't enough people, to go around to service all of these things. As you are aware, social movements are loosely organized, but they are sustained campaigns, and the focus is usually a social goal. And during the time of the pandemic, there were very many social goals that needed to be realized. And of course, the focus is on society's structure and society's values. All of these things came to the fore during the pandemic, and perhaps, I think, to an extent, very much more so. It was exacerbated. There was a lot of questioning that went on. And so as South Africans, we realized that we have much work to do. And the COVID pandemic perhaps brought this realization home more than anything else. It also exposed the fault line in South African society, the whole question about inclusivity, about sustainable development, about inequality, injustice, social injustice, etc. So I think what was important for me was the fact that came home most poignantly during this time was the realization that citizens had a tremendous sense of distrust. Disillusionment, there was a sense of hopelessness amongst the people because we couldn't trust our state anymore. We couldn't trust our government. And what we needed, or what I saw and what many of us saw, was that there was a total disintegration of the social compact in terms of what was happening in South Africa. And this, I'm sure if you followed South Africa, you would have seen that this came more to the fore in July 2021, when we had the July unrest, the violence in KZN. So, as we sat and we thought about this, more and more of us began to realize that this was a very volatile time for South Africans, and that as citizen actors, we needed to step in. We needed to highlight the resilience of South Africans and the commitments that South Africans have to each other, despite, of course, the fact that we have a very, very poor state in terms of governance, accountability, responsibility, etc. But Brendan, there was another thing that impacted on me personally, is that I am part of a minority. So in many ways, I'm a double minority, firstly because I'm Indian, and also because I'm Muslim in South Africa. And so these are things that you need to keep in mind also in terms of your identity when you engage in a social movement and the work that you do. So, all of these labels play a prominent role in what you do, how you do it, when you do it, etc. But the bottom line is that, many of our organizations that came together, it was the Muslims for Humanity, it was, the Lodium organization, the Muslim Women's Network, Caring Women's Forum. It was really a phenomenal amount of groups, organizations, movements that came together and decided that, the number one priority for us was to alleviate hunger. the issue of hunger became phenomenal. It really was out, it flew out the window. And it was shocking to see that in a country like South Africa, and we're a wealthy country, you must remember we have a phenomenal amount of resources, but the level of hunger just escalated. And so, yeah, that's where we focused our attentions on, and we forged ourselves in that particular direction to realize that the priority was to give dignity back to the people, and that is to stop people, children going to dustbins, people were chasing after dump trucks, etc. And we said, no, this cannot be. We need to get together. First, the first coordinated effort was to try and provide food and come together.
Now that you've given us such a great introduction into that, I was curious just more about taking the second question. How was the mobilization effort for getting people to organize to get food to the people that needed it? Was it mostly done online to then say, okay, we'll make our plans online, or was it mostly still done in person? And the mobilization was also an interesting point for us to understand, I guess, during this time.
It was phenomenal. Let me just tell you, despite the fact that it was COVID, people were under lockdown, etc. We're a small community, but we're a big community, if I may say that. Like we're a minority community, but we're an integrated community in the rest of South Africa, the society. With the South African Muslim community has always worked extensively with the broader society. And it was very quickly that we began to realize that things that we had identified a long time ago were now, just escalating, and things had to be done. For many of the young participants in the movements, they soon, following social media, etc., you saw people were complaining that, the government said that they're giving out hampers, etc. But if you look at it, they're paying 1,000 rands for a particular hamper. If you go and buy those, and they would put pictures on Twitter, on Facebook, etc., and show the things that came in those hampers. And if you really calculated the cost of those things, they couldn't have been more than 100 rand or whatever. So the state was claiming to be giving hampers for 1,000 rands, but in fact, it was actually food items to the value of about 100, so 1/10 of the value. Okay, so people in our community started to say we have to make a difference. And it was a funny thing is about the Indian Muslim community, they're not really an online community. They've never really engaged much online, and so we that we center around the mosque, and we center around various kinds of formations that we have. We're almost like a family, if I can say, a broad and a big family, and when we like to meet. So despite the restrictions, I think people started to then call each other up. The network that we have, this one, that one, that one. You've built these networks over the years, and we started to and people started to talk to each other. And these movements, surprisingly, I must tell you, they constitute mostly business people, professionals. Many of them are professional people. Also both of the lockdown professionals were at home, business people were at home. Many stores, etc., were closed down. And a lot of housewives. The women in our community are phenomenal. They work really tremendously, and they work under pressure, and they have a fortitude and a resilience amongst them that is unbelievable. They know how to network. When people say women know how to network, yeah, women know how to network, and our women really came together. So I think many of us came together and we started to talk, and it didn't take much time to realize that we needed stuff. And very quickly, we have lists, because in Ramadan we do hampers, especially with regards food. During Ramadan, during droughts, South Africa has had many calamities, and apartheid, of course, has forced an unequal divide in our society for the longest time. So we're quite geared in these particular issues. And then we're familiar with the areas around us. You must remember, based on the geographies of violence that colonialism and apartheid created, Indian communities were always closest to the African townships, to the squatter camps, to the Bantustans, the homelands. So you know your neighbors, and you know where the hunger is, you know where the problems are. Also, there's realistic concerns here. For example, think about this, Brendan, and I think many people didn't consider this. There are so many workers who take a daily wage, not even weekly or monthly wage. Domestic workers who work once or twice a week, you get paid daily. With the lockdown, all of that came to an end. And suddenly, even that money that you were getting once a week was suddenly just gone, And so the hunger was rife, it was endemic. And we started to talk, and before soon, the professionals came with wonderful ideas, the business people came. were their commitments, and store owners. Really, the generosity was unbelievable. If I tell you, it is something to document what the South African community did together in terms of, simply alleviating hunger on a daily basis. The donations, the generosity, the time, the effort, people across the board, women, children, students, business people, professionals, everybody came together. We just sent out a WhatsApp. You sent out a notice on the local news channel, like we have a Lodium WhatsApp group, etc., community groups.
Okay, and I guess you've already touched on this a bit in terms that you were proud of how everyone came together, but is there other things that you've been particularly proud of or accomplished in this 2.5 year period since the pandemic started in terms of your organizing and in the movements you've been involved with?
So first, I must say that it's never about I, because
Right.
any movement is always a collective effort. People come together, they work together, and really, we saw a dedication and a commitment across the board by people sometimes you would never have thought would come to, but they really, they felt it. It was something we have never experienced. This pandemic, I suppose, in a way, it was many people like never dreamt something like this would happen in their lifetime, or even considered something like this as a possibility. So as an active member of the Caring Women's Forum, which is the organization that I am firstly a member of, and this constitutes only housewives, and some of them are professionals, we come together. We decided that on our own we could do, but if we work together with a broader network of the different women's organizations, the different networks of men, the Muslims for Humanity, Hands, etc., we would have a far greater impact. And so we started to coordinate, and we realized, like I said, the first thing was about alleviating hunger. But to think about, what it is that we accomplished and what we are proud of, I think more specifically that we realized that in these 2 years that, it was not enough just to focus on food, that you had to help people to be sustainable. You had to try and really focus on development and create other opportunities for people so that they would not be in the stranglehold in which many South Africans found themselves during this pandemic. So the teamwork was excellent, the effort was excellent. We have, over the last 2-3 years, focused a lot on bursaries, on now supporting a center where orphan children are in one of the townships not very far from where we live. And we have created a little school, a creche facility, so street children are taken out and brought there on a regular basis. There's a feeding scheme that goes with that particular area, because although the kids come to school, they're hungry. So there are many things that we have done, but I think, it's hard to say. Overall, we have a lot more work to do. We always sit back and say, yes, I can do that, but we have to be realistic also. As housewives, or as professionals, you have only so much time, or you have only so much funds. It's not like large donor organizations or think tanks that get phenomenal funding, etc. So you bite as much as you can chew. The important thing for us has always been is we must do something. Never sit back and say, the problem is too big. Even if you have 2 children, or you have 2 women, give bursary to 1 child, 1 female child to go to school, it is something that you can do and you should do. And that's been our philosophy and our motivation, and that has driven us constantly throughout, even throughout the pandemic. Children were still going to school. School fees had to be paid, bursaries, it was all done online. Bursaries had to be paid. So we continued. For me, the fact is that we didn't just sit back and say, we're all under lockdown now, so there's nothing we can do. Or we tried harder, and we did as much as we possibly could. The beautiful thing is that we tried and we continued with our work. We didn't give up.
And it's in that it's become a very much like a shared experience, and a lot of experiences have been shared and questions have been answered maybe from other groups that you've had. Have you seen new opportunities arise in terms of how you can get feedback or get organized from the pandemic, maybe online, or has it also exposed ways to better speak truth to power in some way by the pandemic exposing the Yeah, the dysfunctionalness of the government. I'm curious of this. Like, have you seen new opportunities arise from the pandemic?
You know what? When I thought about that for a while, and I looked back at it, and I thought, what have we done? What is different here? Has anything changed? And I'm happy to say yes, that there were opportunities. And one might think, how do you get an opportunity out, from something so dismal, so traumatic? But if you look deeper into the situation, you'll realize that with regards to opportunities, I think that from my experience and from everything that we found, that the greatest opportunity I personally, as the individual, would state, is the one thing that happened is that the veils were lifted.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking metaphorically now. So if you look at the fact that the veils were lifted, by that I mean that people from all walks of life of South Africa, for the first time, came into contact with Muslims and started to engage with Muslims as minorities, and with Indian Muslims for that matter, and started to recognize that their needs were our needs, their values were our values, their humanness was our humanness. So it was about recognizing each other for who we are, mm-hmm. human beings, and cutting through that whole notion of, you're familiar with the rise of right-wing supremacist ideology, right, which creates distinctions in society, which focuses on dividing people, and which builds populism and power and strength through hate and that kind of politics. And the South African society, it was phenomenal that we came together, and this is that was the first opportunity, where the first veil was lifted, to recognize each other, that we are a community of people. We live together, we live with each other, next to each other, side by side, and that we share the same kind of identity in terms of who we are as human beings. It's not only a religious identity or a race identity or an ethnic identity, etc. I think it was also an event that brought clarity to the masses. And for me, this is perhaps, in terms of if one considers future, and you consider hope, and you look at your role as a citizen, or you look at, as a mother or a person who's in a country, and you say, is there a possibility of living in this country? Should I stay in this country? Is there hope for me to stay in this country? Well, the pandemic, brought something to the fore, and that was, it brought clarity to the masses in terms of the incompetence of their very own government. For the longest time, I think our masses, and even the elites, the middle class, etc., were refusing to acknowledge that it was their own who was doing this to them. It was always easier to blame the apartheid government, to blame the white people, etc. And now there was a new kind of clarity that came to the fore, and that the incompetence of their own government, it was about their own state, their own people. It was really thieves and thugs who are in our state at the moment, who have taken control and are, harming the poorest of the poor. Because, Brendan, how do you steal from the poor during a pandemic? This is like, it just hits below the belt. So this realization, I think it was a stark realization, and it's brought forth a new form of political identity in the masses. And that political identity is them beginning to question, is it worth it to continue along the same trajectory? And we saw that in the local government elections not so long ago, where there is a shift now. And hopefully 2024, we will see a shift from a dominant one-party system in South Africa, where more people will come to the front. But also it brought home to me the words of a good comrade. His name is Songezo Zibi, and he said to me that, and he was talking about his particular category, his age group, and that is between 35 and 45 years of age. And he said to me, our cohort of individuals, Black people in this particular category, we have failed this nation and we have failed this country. Because what we have done post 1994 is that we have quickly assimilated into comfort, moved into the white suburbs, forgotten about our history, forgotten about our past, about the sufferings of our people, because we ourselves don't want to look back and feel those pains and the trauma again. And as a result, we have become very complacent. Is that we have forgotten about holding to account, raising our voices, and showing the characters that we are. It is all about, ethical individuals, ethical governance, about morality, about accountability, about making sure that we uplift the people. And COVID-19 somehow seems to have been that spoke that has, questioned this cohort of people. And we're seeing it now more and more, where individuals in this particular age group, 35 to 45, are becoming far more active in terms of the political landscape, but also in the way in which they're questioning the political elite, questioning the way that it is going, questioning business ethics, questioning right across the board. And what is really, really good is to see this category of people coming forth now to, to play a part in the political sphere. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps hope, and if you're looking at in terms of, opportunities, I would say this has been the greatest opportunity that could come for South Africa, because we would have probably continued along the same trajectory for the longest time if this event, if I may call it an event, the COVID pandemic would spurred one thing for sure, and that is the need for re-establishing ethical governance, leadership, and ethics and morality amongst the people in society.
Thank you very much for the interview. This was excellent. It was great to hear about this.
Welcome. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.